They didn't just work for Berry Gordy. They built the empire that made him a legend. And when the checks didn't match the hits, some of them didn't stay quiet.
Baby, 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 don't leave me.
This isn't gossip. This is 10 singers, 10 lawsuits, 10 broken partnerships, all backed by court records, memoirs, and their own words. Some of these stories end in settlements. One of them ends in a woman on welfare 8 years to the day after she signed her name away. Let's get into it. Number 10, Kim Weston. It Takes Two, 1966.
So real. One can talk about being.
Before she ever set foot in a Motown studio, Kim Weston was singing gospel with a Detroit touring group called the Right Specials. Motown signed her to its gospel imprint first, then moved her over to Tamla in 1961, where she scored a minor hit almost by accident. Love Me All the Way was originally just the B-side to another single, until a DJ flipped it over and the label had no choice but to promote it. Her real showcase came from a duet album with Marvin Gaye. Producer Mickey Stevenson, who also happened to be her husband, co-wrote a song specifically for the two of them called It Takes Two. It became a top 5 R&B hit, a top 20 pop hit, and one of the most enduring duets Motown ever released. Weston later said that in the studio, she saw a side of Marvin most people never got to see. Encouraging, generous with ideas, but visibly frustrated that he didn't have more control over his own sound. That frustration turned out to be contagious. By the time It Takes Two was climbing the charts in early 1967, Kim Weston had already left Motown in a dispute over royalties, following Stevenson out the door to a new deal at MGM Records. She later sued the label outright.
Just take two.
When Marvin performed the song on American Bandstand that spring, his real duet partner wasn't there. He stood next to a giant rag doll instead, because the woman on the actual record didn't work for Berry Gordy anymore. Her career at MGM never took off the way Motown's promotion machine could have made it. Decades later, she'd say plainly, leaving felt like the right move in the moment, and it cost her almost everything commercially. Number 9, Brenda Holloway. You've Made Me So Very Happy, 1967. Brenda Holloway wasn't from Detroit. She was Motown's very first West Coast signing, a 17-year-old from the Watts Projects of Los Angeles who lip-synced a Mary Wells song at a party and caught Berry Gordy's attention on the spot. Because she stayed in L.A. instead of relocating to Hitsville, she was isolated from the rest of the Motown family almost from day one, cut off from the writers, the producers, the inner circle that built careers back in Detroit. She still managed to become one of the label's most talented voices. Every Little Bit Hurts made her a star. She opened for the Beatles at Shea Stadium in 1965, but her material kept getting handed off. A song she wrote ended up on a Supremes record instead of her own. Then, out of a breakup, she wrote her masterpiece. My boyfriend had quit me, she said years later. I thought, I'm going to write a song about being happy. This man is crazy, leaving me. I'll show him. That song became You've Made Me So Very Happy, co-written with her sister Patrice. Here's where it gets complicated. When the song was credited, Berry Gordy's name went on it too. for what's been described as a minor change to the composition, alongside producer Frank Wilson. 2 years later, the band Blood, Sweat, and Tears turned it into a gold record, a #2 pop smash. Brenda Holloway sued Gordy over unpaid royalties from a song she and her sister had actually written. By then, she'd already walked out of a Detroit recording session mid-take, disillusioned with how her career was being run from 3,000 miles away. Looking back, she didn't mince words. "I could kill myself for walking out. I was so stupid." Number 8, David Ruffin, My Girl, The Temptations, 1965. David Ruffin joined the Temptations in January of 1964, initially just singing background, while Eddie Kendricks and Paul Williams traded off the lead. Smokey Robinson, who wrote and produced most of the group's material, saw something in Ruffin's raspy, gruff yet mellow voice, a sleeping giant, he called it, and set out to write the one perfect song that could unleash it. That song was My Girl. It became the Temptations' first #1 and turned David Ruffin into the group's frontman overnight. But stardom changed him fast. He started arriving at shows in a private mink-lined limousine with his girlfriend, Motown singer Tammy Terrell, while the rest of the group rode together like they always had. When the Supremes were rebranded Diana Ross and the Supremes, Ruffin decided he deserved the same treatment and pushed to have the group renamed David Ruffin and the Temptations. Motown said no. Then he did something almost nobody else at the label had dared to do. He demanded to see the books. He wanted a full accounting of where the group's earnings were actually going, and it caused real lasting friction with Berry Gordy. Motown grudgingly let an outside accountant look into things. But that accountant reportedly still wasn't given full access to the group's financial records through their management company. In 1968, Ruffin sued Motown to get out of his contract entirely. He lost. Months later, after missing a show to be with his girlfriend, he was fired outright and replaced by Dennis Edwards. For years afterward, he'd show up uninvited at Temptations concerts, jump on stage mid-song, and grab the mic back. Because as far as he was concerned, those songs were still in every way that mattered to him, his. Number 7, Gladys Knight and the Pips. I Heard It Through the Grapevine, 1967. Gladys Knight was performing since she was 8 years old. She won a national TV talent contest that young. And by the time she and her family group, the Pips, signed with Motown in 1966, they'd already had one hit on Brunswick Records years earlier and spent a decade on the Chitlin circuit opening for the likes of Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke. Most people think Marvin Gaye owned I Heard It Through the Grapevine. He didn't get there first. Gladys Knight and the Pips recorded it a full year before Marvin's version, and it became Motown's best-selling single up to that point. Over 2.5 million copies sold. Then, in 1968, Marvin's version came out and outsold hers 4-1, a full million copies more. That was the pattern of her entire run at Motown. Talented, hit-making, and still treated in her own words as a second-string act, while other artists got the priority push and the best songs. She wrote in her memoir that Diana Ross had her pulled from a joint tour because the audience's reaction to her soulful performances was overshadowing the headliner. When her contract expired at the end of 1972, she and the Pips didn't renew it. Instead, with the help of their manager, Sidney Seidenberg, who happened to be their accountant first, they landed a multi-million-dollar deal at Buddha Records. Within a year, Midnight Train to Georgia made them Grammy winners and bigger stars than they'd ever been at Motown, on terms they'd actually negotiated for themselves this time. Listen, 90% of you watching these videos right now ain't subscribed yet. If these stories are blowing your mind, imagine what you're missing. Hit subscribe, turn on that bell, and join the R&B fans who never miss a Groove Lens upload. Number 6, Mary Wilson, The Supremes, 1961 to 1977. Mary Wilson was there from the very beginning, a founding member of the Primettes, the group that would become the Supremes, formed in the Brewster Douglas housing projects of Detroit. Deep inside me, and it hurts. She was there through the years the group was mockingly nicknamed the No-Hit Supremes. She was there when Holland Dozier Holland finally cracked the code with Where Did Our Love Go? And she was there through 10 #1 singles. She was also there for every single thing that happened after the hit stopped mattering more than the politics. Wilson stayed through Florence Ballard's firing in 1967 and Diana Ross's departure in 1970. The only original Supreme who saw the entire arc from the projects to the end, when the group finally disbanded in 1977. And in 1986, she wrote the book Motown Didn't Want Written. Dream Girl, My Life as a Supreme, became a runaway bestseller, the first insider account from inside Hitsville, and it did not flatter Berry Gordy or Diana Ross. You were Wilson later put the numbers plainly in interviews. The group's original contract paid just 3% in royalties, split 3 ways, and only after expenses were deducted first. We weren't treated fairly regarding record royalties, she said years afterward, and I will say that until the day I die. Baby, baby, where did I love? She wasn't bitter in the way people expected either. She'd say she was still glad to have been there, that the artists made Motown just as much as Motown made them. But she made absolutely sure the record showed what the sweethearts of Motown were actually being paid while building someone else's empire. Number 5, Martha Reeves and the Vandellas, Dancing in the Street, 1964. Martha Reeves started as a secretary at Motown, literally answering phones and processing payroll for the Funk Brothers before she ever sang a note on a record. She was only in the building at all because a Motown talent scout spotted her singing at a Detroit nightclub and told her to come audition. The audition somehow turned into a desk job instead. Then one day, a scheduled singer didn't show up. Martha stepped in. By 1964, her voice, not her typing, had made her one of the label's biggest stars. Heat Wave, Nowhere to Run, and the civil rights era anthem, Dancing in the Street. A song later co-writer Mickey Stevenson said was actually inspired by watching kids of every race playing together in a fire hydrant's spray on a hot Detroit summer night. In 1989, Martha Reeves went to court over what she was owed. Reeves, along with founding Vandellas Rosalind Ashford and Annette Beard, sued Motown for royalties they said hadn't been paid on the group's records since 1972. A full 17 years of earnings on some of the most played songs of the decade. The case dragged on for 2 years. When it finally settled in 1991, Berry Gordy personally apologized to Reeves for how long it had taken to resolve. It wasn't even her first fight. She'd reportedly won an earlier lawsuit for back royalties back in 1983. And she said publicly that Gordy once sat on the song Jimmy Mac for 2 full years, simply because he felt it sounded too much like a Supremes record, holding back her own hit to protect somebody else's spot on the charts. Number 4, Marvin Gaye, What's Going On, 1971.
Too many of you crying.
By 1970, Marvin Gaye was in a dark place. His duet partner and close friend, Tammy Terrell, had just died after a 3-year battle with a brain tumor. His brother had come home from Vietnam with stories that shook him. And at Motown, he was being boxed into the same happy, safe love songs with no outlet for anything heavier. Then a song fell into his lap, one that gave all of that grief and frustration somewhere to go. When Marvin brought the finished tape of What's Going On to Berry Gordy, who was on vacation in the Bahamas at the time, Gordy's reaction, by his own later account, was blunt. This is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. He refused to release it, worried it would tank both their careers. Marvin refused to record anything else for the label until he changed his mind. It took a Motown sales executive quietly shipping 100,000 copies to record stores completely behind Gordy's back for the song to even reach the public. It became an instant sensation. Gordy caved, drove straight to Marvin's house, and told him he could do whatever he wanted, as long as the album was finished in 30 days. Here's the detail most people don't know, that mistrust ran all the way through to the money, too. Yeah, when Marvin's next contract paid out roughly $1 million, reportedly making him the highest paid black recording artist of that era,
People, you know, we've got.
He had the check blown up to novelty size and hung it over his fireplace because he wanted Berry Gordy's own personal signature on it, permanently framed proof that the man who once called his masterpiece worthless was the one now writing the checks.
So you can see what's going on.
By his own later admission, his goal had shifted from just being an artist to wanting to be richer than Gordy himself. Number 3, Mary Wells, My Guy, 1964. Mary Wells found Berry Gordy, not the other way around. At 17, she chased him down at a Detroit nightclub, hoping he'd pass a song she'd written along to Jackie Wilson. Gordy told her he didn't want to read it, he wanted to hear it. She sang it to him a cappella on the spot, and he signed her the next day. For 3 straight years, she was Motown's biggest star, full stop. Bigger than the Supremes, who hadn't scored a single hit yet. My Guy became her masterpiece, knocking the Beatles out of the #1 spot in the middle of Beatlemania, something absolutely no one else at Motown had managed to do. She toured with the Beatles that same year, and then, weeks after turning 21, at the absolute peak of her career, Mary Wells quit. She argued the contract she'd signed at 17, as a minor with no independent legal counsel present, should never have been valid in the first place. She won that argument, but the settlement came with a brutal condition attached. She gave up every future royalty on every song she'd already recorded, including My Guy, in exchange for a flat payment. Motown reportedly buried her unreleased tracks in the vault afterward and had some of them re-recorded by other singers entirely. By 1990, Mary Wells had laryngeal cancer, no health insurance, and had to sell her own house just to pay for treatment. In 1991, while dying, she sued Motown again and won a six-figure settlement, a fraction of what those songs had actually earned over the years. She testified before Congress about cancer research funding a year before she passed away at just 49 years old, unable to sing, able only to whisper. Number 2, Florence Ballard, The Supremes, 1967. Florence Ballard co-founded The Supremes. She's the one who actually picked the name off a list. In the group's early years, before the hits, she and Diana Ross traded off lead vocals fairly evenly, right up until Berry Gordy made the call to hand Ross the spotlight permanently. Ballard, in her own words, remembered the pressure landing squarely on her after that. Gordy would say, "Florence, you're not doing it right. Flo, you're overweight." She started drinking. The tension with Ross and Wilson got worse, and in July of 1967, everything came to a head. Right before the group took the stage at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, Gordy told her flatly, "If you go on stage tonight, I'll throw you off it." She didn't go on. Cindy Birdsong changed into her clothes and performed in her place instead. You wanna leave me behind, baby, baby. Ooh. Florence Ballard's tenure with the Supremes ended that night at 24 years old, and the group was rebranded Diana Ross and the Supremes almost immediately afterward. Ooh, deep inside me. She sued Motown for $8 million. The label countered that she'd been let go over her conduct and her performance. She lost. Her attempted solo career on ABC Records went nowhere, poorly promoted and quickly forgotten. And it hurt so bad. By 1975, Florence Ballard was collecting welfare, raising 3 daughters alongside her mother and sister in a small house in Detroit after losing her own home to foreclosure. She told the Miami Herald that year that she felt stronger as a person, that she still wanted to sing. Less than a year later, on February 22, 1976, 8 years to the day since she signed away her rights as a Supreme, Florence Ballard died of cardiac arrest. She was 32 years old. Number 1, the Jackson 5. I Want You Back, 1969. The Jackson 5 almost didn't make it to Motown at all. They'd already been rejected once by a small Chicago label before Gladys Knight. The very first established star to champion them sent Berry Gordy a demo tape that got returned unopened. It took Bobby Taylor of the Vancouvers personally sending the brothers to Detroit for an audition before Gordy finally signed them in 1969. It was worth the wait, for Motown at least. The Jackson 5 became the first group in history to debut with 4 consecutive #1 hits. I Want You Back, ABC, The Love You Save, and I'll Be There. An 11-year-old Michael Jackson out front, written by an in-house team Gordy assembled called The Corporation. By 1975, the brothers had sold over 60 million records worldwide, and that's when they learned exactly what they were earning for it. Roughly 2.8% in royalties on every single one of those 60 million copies. Most of the group opted out of recording for Motown any further, demanding real creative control and a fairer cut of what they'd built. Their father, Joe, negotiated a new deal with Epic Records instead, offering a 20% royalty, more than 7 times what Motown had been paying them.
But someone wanna pick you from the bunch. One glance was on it.
There was one final gut punch waiting on the way out the door. Unbeknownst to the family, Berry Gordy had quietly trademarked the name the Jackson 5 itself. When the brothers signed with Epic, Motown legally blocked them from taking the name with them into their new deal. 4 brothers left to become simply the Jacksons. Jermaine, recently married to Gordy's own daughter, Hazel, chose to stay behind at Motown, the only brother who didn't walk out the door. 10 singers, 10 different rooms, 10 different years, one common thread. The sound of Motown was built by voices who, sooner or later, had to fight to get paid for it. Some settled, some sued and lost. One never got the chance to see her name cleared before she was gone. That's the real story behind the songs you already know by heart.